Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Market Talk. I'm Mike Pearson, sitting in for Jesse Allen this week, who has had a very busy week indeed. Jesse and his lovely wife yesterday celebrated the birth of their first son, John William, born yesterday. Mom and baby are doing great. Congratulations to Jesse and Katie on their growing family. It's an honor to get to keep this seat warm while he spends time bonding with his new one. We've got a big show coming today. We'll be talking with Matt Bennett here later in the program about the moves in the futures markets. But of course, so many of these moves are predicated on what's coming from the sky. Joining me first is Eric Snodgrass. He's the Senior Science Fellow over at Nutrien, puts out quality weather data every day for free at ag-wx.com. Eric, the weather, a lot going on here this week, isn't there?
Yeah, we're kind of in this long stretch of severe weather where over the last 3 weeks, a lot of the plains and Midwest have seen repeated chances of getting big tornadic thunderstorms, a lot of hail, and some straight line wind damage. And yesterday was no exception. Early this week, we saw the Storm Prediction Center issue a high risk. That's their highest category that they have. And it was for parts of Kansas and Oklahoma, which did see a pretty nasty squall line that was preceded by several large supercells. And so we think about that area and the water stresses that have been in central Kansas this spring. And some of these storms have come through and delivered a good drink of rain for some of those folks. But the reality of it is that the pattern is going to continue to stay active as we press through the rest of this week. So here it is. Today, it's in the Ohio River Valley. Tomorrow, it's going to stretch from the Red River of the South all the way to the Ohio River Valley. We're just going to keep things active for a while. And with some of these storms, a lot of rain's coming in.
So with the system coming tomorrow, the long one stretching from Texas all the way to the Ohio, is that going to be like we saw yesterday, a steady squall line moving across, or is that where you're just going to be watching for pockets of supercells that could fire up?
Yeah, so I think what will happen is we'll begin the day. Our first round of severe weather will be these discrete supercell thunderstorms. But nearly always with these types of systems, a big line comes through and just knocks the whole thing out late in the day. So the question will be how many of the supercells break out early in parts of the Mid-South to the Ohio Valley? And then what does the potential wind damage look like on the backside as the squall line comes running through? But here's the good news, Mike. I think that after we get through this, these big repeated large low pressure systems that are dumping lots and lots and lots of rain. I mean, do you understand there's parts of Texas right now that have had 800 to 1,000% normal rainfall in the last 30 days? That's not like just last week, but the last 30 days. Meanwhile, you've got parts of central and southern Kansas that can't buy a drop of rain. I mean, they got a little bit over the weekend, but those folks are going to say, great, that put a Band-Aid on what has been a gash. We need to get more precipitation in here. But to the north, it's been wet. The Red River Valley of the north, much of the northern plains have had to struggle kind of getting, early jump on the season. It's been cold behind these systems. And even as you and I are recording this today, it's snowing in parts of Montana. They've got snow in California this past weekend, all the way down to the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. So the atmosphere's got to break away from this. And once it does break away from this, we start to get ourselves into a pattern that maybe opens up some planting windows. But man, I won't be upset to see this one go just to get rid of all this severe weather.
Absolutely. It has been heartbreaking to see some of the impact across social media and all of these things from the high wind events in particular. Eric, while we're thinking about the impact of this rainfall, there has been that dry 4-year-long drought in eastern Iowa. It's been right in the target of most of these big rain events over the past week. Do you expect the drought monitor to show an improvement there in the central part of the Corn Belt next week?
Yeah, it will. It'll be slow because remember, the drought monitor is a cumulative statistic. So it's not just all of a sudden going to show the recent good rains that have come through there. But, it's interesting. I've talked to a couple of growers in the Northeast Iowa area, and they said, man, my neighbor a couple miles down the road got so much more rain than I did out of these storms. I'm still hurting. I need some more. And so it's not as though everybody's gotten a huge drink of rain, but there's been moisture. That's better than what we have said. So to maybe come to your point a bit, I was looking at NASA's soil moisture maps. They make them every day. They're modeled. They're not observed, but they're modeled. And what it did show is that it's very hard in the I states to find the remnants of last fall's drought hanging on in big areas. So that's good. Although with all this rain here in early May, we raced out to plant a little bit over the weekend, then had to jump out as the storms came through. And so no one's really found a big wide open window where they can get the ideal conditions to get going. So maybe that's coming soon. I think that might be next week's discussion, but that's where we currently stand.
All right. So we'll save that one for next week. This week, It's going to be that patchy, spotty. If you get the rain, you're out. If it's clear, you'll be in the field.
Yeah, and there is a little cooler air coming in the backside of this. So I actually have a frost for north central Wisconsin. I mean, I know that's kind of outside what we typically think of the primary corn and soybean belt, but also in the high plains of Colorado, we're going to touch a freezing temperature. So there's some cooler air stacked up behind this, but for the majority of the folks listening right now, frost risk is out as we kind of progress our way through this mid-May timeframe.
All right, let's look out a little bit longer term, Eric, if we can. What do you see developing as we push farther into summer?
Yeah, so this is where things are getting, of course, speculative, and they always are. But the reality is that El Nino's gone. Trade winds have resumed their normal behavior. The cooler water is beginning to surface, and the ocean temperatures right there in the middle of the equatorial Pacific are now below a half degree Celsius above average. Does that make sense? You're getting closer to normal. And therefore, there's no indications that El Nino is still around. And so we're transitioning now to La Nina. What I'm watching more carefully is the North Pacific Ocean temperatures. In the last 7 days, it's got very warm north of Hawaii. Now, here's the big idea. If that warm water in the next 45 days pushes right up to British Columbia or right up to Washington, Oregon, then our chances in the midsection of the country of having a hot, stormy summer increase. I think we get plenty of rain. If it doesn't happen and those waters get cooler and cooler and cooler, we're going to be worrying about drought that could be already to the west, starting to move into the central United States, moving into and covering most of the Corn Belt. Now, I think that's a lower chance of happening, but it's a risk that's there. So watch the North Pacific Ocean temperatures that hug from Alaska to British Columbia down to Washington, Oregon, even off California. They get cooler and cooler with time. We've got a story developing for not just small patches of drought, which that develops every summer, but more regional drought that could hit a bigger area here in the primary corn and soybean belt. Got to watch it carefully.
Eric, when you say watch it carefully, when you talk about watching these water temperatures here in the Northern Pacific, how do I, a layperson, get that information? Is it out there? Can I interpret it, or do I just need to listen to the experts?
Well, I always want you to listen to the experts because that's why I have a job. But no, but that's a good question. So on my website, ag-wx.com, you can go look at sea surface temperatures. And then what I would tell folks to do is just look at them once a week. And if they get bluer and bluer and bluer, then that's the symptom to what the atmosphere is up to. So if it's getting colder and colder, that means the atmosphere wants to dip and put a trough just off the west coast of the United States. And in summer, you can't have a trough on the west coast of the US and not have a ridge built right over the ice states. So long story short, I just check out the website, keep a close eye on it. Or if you don't have time, that's why I talk with you guys every Monday. We get into the details and I'll worry about it for you.
That is fantastic. It is right there on the website. It is fascinating to watch this data change in practically real time, as fast as we can collect this information anymore. Speaking of real time, Eric, there have been a lot of real time updates out of southern Brazil. Looking around the world from an ag perspective, it seems as though this flooding is a major deal. Can you fill us in on what's happening there and how it looks going from here?
Yeah, so just this morning, I pulled up a map that I created that looks at the last 30 days of total accumulated precipitation in a place called Rio Grande do Sul. And that's, of course, hitting a lot of the news. Now, just so everyone's clear, Rio Grande do Sul does not grow a safrinha corn crop. It's pretty far to the south. They grow full season crops down there, but it's a huge part of Brazilian agriculture. There's a spot in Rio Grande do Sul that has received in the last 30 days between 8 and 20 plus inches of rain. And I'm just going to tell you how big it is. You can put all of Iowa inside of that spot. So this is a huge area of flooding. You go one state north of it to Santa Catarina, and then one state north of that into Paraná, and all of a sudden now you're into this area that for the last 2.5 weeks has been almost completely dry. Now that's where we grow a lot of safrinha crop. So we have the safrinha crop that saw the shutdown of the monsoon about 2 weeks earlier than average. And you have southern Brazil into Paraguay and Uruguay and northern Argentina that have seen massive amounts of flooding. In fact, I just checked the Paraná River, which runs right in the middle of all of that. And it is very, very near its flood stage, even as you follow it all the way down to like Rosario. So what's the story there? It's too wet south and not wet enough north. And then don't forget, Argentina has got some really cold air working its way up from the south over the next 5 to 7 days. And we could be looking at our first frost events hitting broader areas like toward Buenos Aires or over toward Cordoba. Now, I don't know if that's going to be impactful. Maybe it's late enough in the season that, okay, frost doesn't matter. But if something was planted late, then there's a discussion there.
Oh, man. So, Eric, as we look at, we know that they're still working to get the crops out of that southern region, Rio Grande do Sul. Last I heard, there was maybe 30 to 40% of the crops have been harvested. Looking out over the next couple of weeks, does it appear that they're going to get a relief from the rainfall, or does the system set up to just keep hammering that region?
Yeah, it keeps hammering that region, at
Ooh.
least in the next week. So yesterday's model runs were the most aggressive. They were actually calling for another 4 to 8 inches of rain in the next 10 days. They backed off, thankfully, a little bit today. But I mean, honestly, you get another inch of rain in the next 10 days, that's too much. So there are some places that are going to continue to see some major flooding down there. And to be honest, I think it's an important part of the market story. I think it's one of the catalysts to get things to move. I'll be really interested to hear what Matt Bennett has to say in terms of kind of attributing weather to some recent market moves. But yeah, it's certainly making the headlines right now.
It is indeed. Eric, before we let you go, the other global issue that I've been watching here for the past month, maybe 6 weeks, has been the higher than average temperatures across Russia. In the Russian wheat belt, sort of that hot and dry period they've had. Can you fill us in? How bad has that been? Do we know what the consequences been? And are things starting to moderate at all?
Yeah, so it's kind of like a similar situation to parts of central Kansas, where it was so warm coming out of winter into spring, and then but they weren't being able to get the rain. And where the rain was missing was the southern Russian wheat belt. So that's like near Kazakhstan, near Turkey, near the eastern side of the Black Sea. That area. Now, what's happened since then is the next 10 days. Just north of there, that kind of northern Russian wheat belt is about to get hammered with really, really cold air. I mean, 10 to 20 degrees colder than average over a 10-day stretch. So you flip the script on that same area. And you can't look at that and say that that's going to be great for the crops they've got going in that region. And I've got a lot of folks over there who keep messaging me, wondering if they're going into a repeat of 2010 because they remember something like this happening in 2010. Now, is 2010 a potential analog to this year? It is in my analog package, but it is not the strongest analog. So I want to be careful there because there was a massive Russian wheat belt drought in 2010, which, if you remember, was kind of combined with some new information we got about biofuels and whatnot, and it just sent prices through the roof. And if we could make that happen again, Mike, we'd have a lot of fans, right? But the reality of it is that it needs to be watched carefully. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That 2010 move in wheat, boy, it just shows the power that these markets can have when the factors come together to influence them. Eric, you keep track of what's happening around the world. As you sit here and look around the global weather scenario, are there any other issues that farmers here in the United States ought to be watching when it comes to global climate and weather?
Yeah, a couple of things to think about. It's been extremely wet throughout Indonesia, and that's critical to understand where things might set up in that part of the world later this year. It's been very wet south of the Yangtze River. That's a major agricultural area. While we don't compete with it in our two states, here in the I states, it's still important to global production agriculture. We've had flooding in the Middle East. That's been very interesting and compelling to watch. And then the big thing will be, as we move through this summer, how much warmer does the Atlantic get? Because if it gets warmer than it currently is, it's get wetter than it is, which means more hurricanes that are possibly going to go through that area. A lot of us are very concerned about what could be a pretty active hurricane season going into 2024's late summer and early fall. So those are the top topics that I'm thinking about right now. And that I think that's plenty to worry about. So we'll keep an eye on.
There's always something going on. Eric, hurricane season, when does that kick off officially?
Yeah, we might get a few early systems. We've had them as early as May and early June, but generally speaking, the bulk of the hurricane season starts, mid-August and goes all the way through the end of October.
Okay, mid-August to October. We'll continue to watch what's happening there in the Atlantic and in the Gulf of Mexico. And no doubt, Eric, you'll continue talking with Jesse each Monday right here on Market Talk. Is that right?
That's the plan.
Fantastic. Folks, to keep up with all of that weather information, visit Eric's website, ag-wx.com. Eric Snodgrass, Senior Science Fellow with Nutrien. As always, thanks for joining us here on Market Talk.
Yeah, you bet.
Folks, stay with us. We'll have more program coming up in just a moment.